Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome to those of you here who braved the winds to get here. And Shabbat Shalom to those of you who are watching us on YouTube and on Facebook. We begin our Shabbat evening, this final Shabbat of Pesach this year, on page 128 in our Siddur. The very, very top of the page. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Page 129, not quite at the bottom of the page. When I keep Shabbat, God watches over me. It is a sign forever between God and me. Yeshmer Shabbat El Yishmereni, Ki Yeshmer Shabbat El Yishmereni, Oti le'ol me'ad beino uveini, Oti le'ol me'ad beino uveini. Yeshmer Shabbat El Yishmereni, Ki Yeshmer Shabbat El Yishmereni, Oti le'ol me'ad beino uveini, Oti le'ol me'ad beino uveini. If you will turn in your Siddur back to page 120, back just a few pages, we're going to invite Caroline Bloom to come up and lead us in our candle lighting.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Thank you, Caroline. We continue as we make our way to page 130 as we enter into Kabbalat Shabbat, the Psalms of welcoming in Shabbat. We begin with Psalm 95, Lechu neranena Come, let us sing joyfully to God. Lechu neranina, lechu neranina, lechu neranina l'Adonai. Lechu neranina, lechu neranina, lechu neranina l'Adonai. Naria, naria, litzuri shenu, lekadma fana b'toda. Naria, naria, litzuri shenu, bizmirot naria lo. Lechu neranina, lechu neranina, lechu neranina l'Adonai. Lechu neranina, lechu neranina, lechu neranina l'Adonai. On page 131, near the bottom of the page, we sing the words, Yismechu hashamayim, may the heavens be happy, V'tagel haaretz, and may the earth rejoice, V'yir am hayam, and may the sea also join in, Umelo, and all that fills them, so all of God's creation, in the air, in the sea, and on the land, all of God's creation sends praise back to God for that very creation. The bottom paragraph of page 131. Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz. Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz. Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, umelo. Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, umelo. Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, Yismechu hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz. You know, there's an interesting discussion in the Talmud about whether you can clap on Shabbat. And what did the Talmud rabbis say? How many votes for yes, you can clap? How many votes for no, you can't clap? How many votes for I'm too chicken to vote? A few of those. So actually, the Talmudic answer actually says no clapping on Shabbat. And why do they say no clapping on Shabbat? Because they say Shabbat is joyful, but if you clap too much, you'll get carried away, and you will be as joyful as we were in the time that the ancient temple existed. And since the ancient temple doesn't exist anymore, we have to have like a little modicum of sadness amongst our joy. So along came the year 1948, and the state of Israel was established. And when the state of Israel was established, a group of rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, not liberal rabbis, Orthodox rabbis said, all those rules about keeping things sad because there's no temple and no Jewish dominion over the land of Israel, there's now a Jewish state of Israel, so we can toss all those laws that they said in the Talmud after the temple was destroyed, get rid of all of those laws. We don't need them anymore for all of these things that you have to remain sad because Jews don't rule Israel. Because now Jews do Israel. We do rule over Israel, and the result of that was they got outvoted. That's really what happened. But I think they were right, and I think most of the non-Orthodox world thinks they were right. And so because of that, we get to clap on Shabbat, and we get to sing these psalms joyfully. So, we argue with each other through history. In the Talmud, it says, Rabbi so-and-so said this, Rabbi so-and-so replied with that, and then a third rabbi said this. And we just read that as if they were in the room with each other. But if you actually do a little study, you'll find out that the first rabbi was born 150 years before the second rabbi, who was born 100 years before the third rabbi. So in some cases, they're in the room talking to each other. But in some cases, they're talking to each other over a period of hundreds of years. And we get to continue the conversation over a period of thousands of years. So we get to talk with those guys also. Page 132 at the bottom, a piece of music that includes a little bit of clapping or snapping or so. 132 at the bottom, the words say, Or Zaru Alat Sadiq. Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha, light is sown for the righteous. And people who are good-hearted people will have joyful light. Or Zaru Alat Sadiq, Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha. Or Zaru Alat Sadiq, Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha. Or Zaru Alat Sadiq, Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha. Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha. Or Zaru Alat Sadiq, Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha. Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha. Lai 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 lai. Or Zaru Alat Sadiq, Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha. Or Zaru Alat Sadiq, Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha. At the bottom of 133, we read together a portion of Psalm 98 in English. A psalm. Sing to Adonai a new song, for God has worked wonders. God's right hand, God's holy arm has won God victory. Adonai has manifested God's victory, has displayed God's triumph in the sight of the nations. God was mindful of God's steadfast love and faithfulness toward the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth beheld our victory of our God. Raise a shout to Adonai, all the earth. Break into joyous songs of praise. We sing one of those joyous songs, Psalm 99 on page 135. The last paragraph, Exalt Adonai our God, and bow down at God's holy mountain, for Adonai our God is holy, and since God is holy, we strive to be holy. The last three lines of the psalm in Hebrew. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho. From Psalm 29 on page 136 and 137, we read together in English, a psalm of David. Ascribe to Adonai, O divine beings. Ascribe to Adonai glory and strength. Ascribe to Adonai the glory of God's name. Bow down to Adonai, majestic in holiness. The voice of Adonai is over the waters. The God of glory thunders, Adonai over the mighty waters. The voice of Adonai is power. The voice of Adonai is majesty. The voice of Adonai breaks cedars. Adonai shatters the cedars of Lebanon. God makes Lebanon skip like a calf, Sirion like a young wild ox. The voice of Adonai kindles flames of fire. The voice of Adonai convulses the wilderness. Adonai convulses the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of Adonai causes hinds to calf and strips forest bare. While in God's temple all say glory. Adonai sat enthroned at the flood. Adonai sits enthroned, sovereign forever. May Adonai grant strength to God's people. May Adonai bestow on God's people well-being. Throughout this psalm, it speaks of the voice of Adonai, the voice of God. If you listen for a moment, It was there while we were reading in the English. Now that we're not reading anymore, it's not there anymore. But you could hear that whistling of the wind. Whenever I read this psalm, that's what I imagine the sound of God's voice being. The whistling of the wind through the leaves of the trees and through the grass. That's always what's in my imagination as this psalm talks about the voice of God. To me, it's the sounds that we hear when we're out in nature. That's what I imagine it sounding like. And so we had the sounds of God with us as we read these words in English. We find the last couple of lines. May God grant strength to God's people, and may God bestow on God's people well-being. Those last two lines, the last two lines of the Hebrew. Lai, 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 lai. Adonai oz le'amo, yitain. Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. Adonai oz le'amo, yitain. Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. Lai, 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 on page 138 and 139, we welcome in the image of the Shabbat bride with the words of Lecha Dodi. Lecha, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela, Lecha, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela, la 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 la, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela, Lecha, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela, la 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 la, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela, Lecha, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Hishmi'anu el hamiuchad, Adonai echad u'shimo echad, L'shem u'tiferet b'letchila, la 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 la, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela, Lecha, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'ne'alcha, Ki mekor habracha, Mirosh mikedem nesucha, Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila, la 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 la, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela, Lecha, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela. Verse number 5. Hit'oreri, hit'oreri, Ki va'orech kumi uri, 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 shir daveri, Kivod Adonai alayich, Nigla la 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 la, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela, Lecha, Lecha Dodi, Likrat, Likrat Kala, P'nei, P'nei Shabbat Nikabela. We rise, we face the door as we welcome the Shabbat bride. Boi v'shalom, עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצולה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, לה 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 לה, לך דודי, לקראת חלה, פני שבת נקבלה, לך דודי, לקראת חלה, פני שבת נקבלה. As we've welcomed the Shabbat bride, we can welcome each other. So turn to your neighbors, wish everybody Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And Shabbat Shalom to all of you joining us on our virtual platforms as well. As we continue to greet each other a little bit on page 140, we continue with a psalm of Shabbat. Let us give thanks to God for all of creation, for the beauty of Shabbat, for the beauty of this festival of Matzot that is slowly coming to a close. We'll talk about that after this psalm. Mizmor shir leyom haShabbat, tov lehodot la'Adonai. Ulizamer leshimcha elyon, ulizamer leshimcha elyon, page 140. Mizmor shir leyom haShabbat, tov lehodot la'Adonai. Ulizamer leshimcha elyon, ulizamer leshimcha elyon. Hagid baboker chastecha, ve'emunatecha ba'alelot. Alei asor ve'alei navel, alei higayon bechinor. Mizmor shir leyom haShabbat, tov lehodot la'Adonai. Ulizamer leshimcha elyon, ulizamer leshimcha elyon. So as we said, Shabbat is coming in and Pesach is coming to a close. For some people in this room and online, Pesach ends in about an hour, roughly. For some people in this room, Pesach ends about an hour and a day from now. Because Pesach is 7 days long, or it's 8 days long, and if you celebrate it for 7 days, you are correct. And if you celebrate it for 8 days, you are correct. How can that be? The Torah says that Pesach is 7 days long. So in Israel, Pesach ends Friday night, tonight. In Israel, Pesach's over, but they're still eating matzah for another day. We'll get to that in a moment. In the diaspora, except for the Reform movement, I should say except for the American Reform movement, the American Reform movement follows the Israeli plan. It's 7 days long. We have the science to know when the holiday begins and ends in Israel, so we don't need to have an 8th day. But the rest of the diaspora community has an 8th day of Pesach, and so Pesach will come to an end tomorrow evening, where we will celebrate Mimuna. We'll talk about that a little later on in the service. But in Israel, they're still going to eat matzah for another day, even though Pesach is over. Why would that be? Well, I'll tell you the answer. So we, at the beginning of, do you think you know? Why do you think you know? They what? That's the answer. All right, we're going to move on with the service. No, Judy just said, because they bought too much matzah. I love that answer. It's not the right answer, but I love that answer anyway. So that's a great answer. It's probably also true. They probably did buy too much matzah. But here's the deal. At the beginning of Pesach, we sell our chametz, right? Now, Pesach ends right as Shabbat begins. Once Shabbat begins, we cannot engage in financial transactions and trade money. And so to purchase the chametz back from the person to whom it was sold, we have to actually purchase it back. And in Israel, the chief rabbinate sells it. There's a particular family. They live in Jerusalem. They actually don't live in Jerusalem. They actually live in a little Arab village called Abu Ghosh, which is just right outside of Jerusalem. And for generations, they have purchased all the chametz of the state of Israel. And before there was a state of Israel, of the Jewish community in the land of Israel, they purchased the chametz. For 7 days, they are one of the richest families on planet Earth because legally, they own almost every factory and every restaurant in the state of Israel. They are instant billionaires. It's really true. And at the end of Pesach, they sell everything back to the chief rabbi, and the chief rabbi pays more back to the family than they paid to him as a little service fee for saying thank you for being of service to the Jewish people. It's a nice thing between the Jewish and the Muslim community, right? A beautiful getting along of two religions. But we have a problem. On Friday night, Shabbat starts. The moment Shabbat starts is the moment that Pesach ends for this year, because it's the end of the seventh day. So there can't be a financial consideration that's traded. And so since they can't buy the chametz, and they can't then own the chametz because they didn't buy it back, so they still have to eat matzah for one more day, even though it's not Pesach, because they don't own any chametz that they can eat instead. And so they're stuck eating. They get the joy of eating. Did I say stuck? They get the joy of eating matzah for one more day until Saturday night comes along, at which point in Israel they will celebrate Mamuna. As I said, we'll talk about that in a moment. And also another celebration that's happening in Israel tomorrow night, Saturday night, at officially 8:30 p.m. on Saturday night. Israel's indoor mask mandate comes to an end, except in medical settings and on mass transportation, airplanes. So they'll get to celebrate Mamuna without masks in Israel. We'll talk about Mamuna in a little while. But that's why even though Passover's over in Israel now, they're still eating chametz, or still eating matzah, because they can't buy the chametz, unless, of course, you don't follow that stuff and you're a little more liberal with it. And then people went out and bought some chametz, so what can I say? We continue page 144 as we make our way into our Ma'ariv service. Yitkada v'yitkada shemei rabba v'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon u'chayidechol beit Yisrael ba'agala u'vizman karivim eru amen yehei shmei rabba mevorach le'alam alame almaya yitbarach Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitba'ar, v'yitram, v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, shemei d'kudusha, b'richu le'elah min kol berchata, v'shirata, tushbechata, v'nechemata, damiron be'alma, v'imeru, amen. We rise, page 146 for Baruch Hu. Lai 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 Baruch Hu et Adonai Mevorach le'olam va'ed. We can all be seated. We read together in the middle of page 149. This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Baruch atah Adonai, ha'ma'ariv aravim. Blessed are you, O God, the one who brings on the evening. We give thanks for the gift of the Torah, page 150. as we sing the words of Ahavat Olam with an eternal love. God has given us the Torah to be our guide for each and every day as we make our way through the story of our lives. Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael, Amcha Ahavta, Amcha Ahavta. Torah u'mitzvot, ukimu mishpatim, otanu limadita, otanu limadita. Al kein Adonai Eloheinu b'shokvenu v'kumenu nasiach b'chokecha v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha u'b'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed ki hein chayenu ve'orech yameinu uvahem nehege yomam v'layla nehege yomam v'layla v'avatcha al tasir mimenu le'olamim baruch ata Adonai ohev amo Yisrael ohev amo Yisrael. We join together in the words of Shema, page 152 and 153. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Page 154. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom alevavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta abam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'aderech uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha uv'kshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha uv'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uv'ish'arecha leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim le'orechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem Adonai Elohechem emet. On page 159, we read together as a preface to our recitation of words that come from Shirat Hayam, or the Song of the Sea, the song that our ancestors sang when the sea parted on their way toward freedom. Sing the song of men and women, join in understanding and respect the song of God's miracles, an earth protected and cherished, a gift for our children and the generations to come. The song of a land once ravaged by war, now quiet and content. Her soldiers home to leave no more. The song of a world redeemed. The song of peace. On 158, we join together in the words of Michamocha, this being either the last or the next to the last day of Pesach, depending upon your perspective. We sing Michamocha to a melody that's one of those famous Pesach songs that we sing at the end of the Seder called Adir Hu. Everybody know Adir Hu? Right? Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar ba'kodesh, norat hilot osefele malechutecha ra'uvanecha, bokei ayam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, ze'eli anu ve'omru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, le'olam va'ed, le'olam va'ed. Each night we ask God to lie us down in peace and to bring us to life the next day in peace as well. Protect us from enemy and illness and war, from famine and sorrow and wrongdoing. As we ask God to protect us through the night, we use these words, Hashki venu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, lie us down in peace. V'ha'amidenu shomreinu l'chaim, and cause us to rise up again tomorrow to life. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, l'shalom, v'ha'amidenu shomreinu l'chaim, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, l'shalom, v'ha'amidenu shomreinu l'chaim, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, amen. Shelter us beneath your wings, O Adonai. Guard us from all harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us, God, wrong from right. Amen. 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 Page 162. We come to Vishamru. The people of Israel will keep Shabbat, observing the Shabbat throughout the ages as a covenant for all time. It is a sign for all time between me and the people of Israel. For in 6 days Adonai made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day God ceased from all the work and was refreshed. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat lidorot b'rit olam. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat lidorot b'rit olam. V'nuvein b'nei Yisrael oti leolam, oti leolam. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat lidorot b'rit Yamin. Asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et hashabat la'asot et hashabat lidorot olam u'veyom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash Shavat vayinafash, Shavat vayinafash. Shamru b'nei Yisrael et hashavat la'asot et hashavat lidor taverit olam. As we turn to page 164, we rise as we'll join together in our Amidah. Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi agid tehilatecha. 166. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, ve'Konei Hakol, ve'Zocher Chasdei Avot ve'Imahot, Umevig ula livnei v'nehem l'ma'an shemo be'ahava melech ozer Moshiach u'magin Baruch atah Adonai magin Avraham ve'ezrat Sarah atah gibor le'olam Adonai mechayeh hakol atah rav lehoshia morid hatal mechalkel chayim bechesed Mechaye hakol berachamim rabim Zomech noflim verofe cholim Umatir asurim Umekayem emunato B'shenei afar Michamocha ba'givurot Umido melach Melech mimit umechaye Umatzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman atah lachayot hakol Baruch atah Adonai Michaye hakol. 170. Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh U'kadoshim b'chol yom yahaladucha selah Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. We continue silently through 180 and 181. When you finish with your silent prayers, please be seated. Page 174. We have what's known as the Avodah prayer. The Avodah prayer was originally written to be a commemoration of the sacrificial ceremonies that happened in the ancient temple. In more liberal denominations of Judaism, we've rewritten the prayer to, well, not rewritten, just made a few revisions, I should say, into a prayer that still speaks of the same idea of asking God to accept our worship, whether it be in the form of that ancient worship of the sacrifice or what we call today the sacrifice of the heart. A beautiful melody for that particular thought on this festival of Pesach, this festival of a time when in ancient times we did do sacrifices in the temple. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu ve'amecha Yisrael u'tefilatam be'ahava tikabel u'liratzon Tamid avodat Yisrael. Yisrael Amecha. El karov lechol korav pni el avodecha v'chaninu. Shivuch ruchecha. B'shuvecha l'tzion v'rachamim Baruch atah Adonai Hamachazir Shechinato We turn to page 371. On page 371, in the middle of the page, we will in a moment sing the words of Mishaberach for Cholim, the healing prayer for those who are sick. As I'm reading the list that I have here, for those of you who are with us virtually on one of our virtual platforms, you can either type into the chat box or say out loud where you are the names of anyone that you have for healing, and after I finish my list here, I'll ask if anyone in the room has names to add as well. We ask for God to bring Refuah Shlema, complete healing, to Yishav Zaza, Carrie Schillinger, Robert Oppenheim, Carrie Susser, Brian Zabel, Sylvia Chuk, Reuven ben Sipora, Chaim Mordechai ben Shmuel Yisaschar, Irene Lambert, Moshe ben Avraham, Avram ben Udul, Avram ben Meir, Ari Tzvi ben Menachem Mendel V'chana, Ken Pepper, Stanley Sachs, John Scheck, Lee Miller, Steve Volin, Judy Bauman, Wanda Frisky, Toby Sulka Bat Bailey Rivka, Seth McKinney, Evan Burnett, Ellen McIntosh, John Redmond Palmer, William Redmond Palmer, Molly Delaney, Marvin Strait, Beverly Bellin, Calvin Waxman, Nee Howard, Yaakov ben Moshe Halevi, Susan Perry, Paltiela Bat Mordechaieva Vasha, and Amy Sutton. Do we have other names that anyone has in the room here? Thank you. Yes, we actually, I know we don't recognize it, but Chaim Mordechai ben Shmuel Yisaschar is Howard Kirstel. So we can say his name in English as well. Absolutely. Thank you. Any others on this side of the room? On this side, yeah. Thank you. Any others? As we join together in the words of Misha Berach on page 371, we also think of all those who are still suffering worldwide from the COVID-19 pandemic, all those, there are still a few in the hospital from the terrorist attacks that happened in Israel this month, and also for those who are suffering from the war in Ukraine and who are hospitalized, many hospitalized from the terror of war there. We ask for healing for all of them as well. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach Imoteinu Mikor habracha leavoteinu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. This week we bring Pesach to a close, and as I mentioned earlier, we bring it to a close with the observance of Memuna. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Memuna. One person besides me. Raise your hand if you've never heard of Memuna. Good, then I get to tell you about it. If you all raised your hand, I'd say, you already know. But I'm going to tell you about Memuna. Memuna, the name of the Memuna is a Jewish holiday. If you're Moroccan, or now if you're Israeli. It's a Moroccan Jewish holiday. It originates in the Moroccan Jewish community. And the name of it comes from, well, we don't really know. We have some guesses. As to where it comes from. One is that the word memuna is similar to the Hebrew word emunah, which means belief or faith. And that after the exodus from Egypt, we have faith in God that God will deliver us. Maybe that's where the name comes from. Another thought is that we know a famous rabbi from 1,000 years ago by the name of Maimonides. And Maimonides, also known by his full name, Moshe ben Maimon, Moses, the son of Maimon. Maimon, Memuna, you see the connection there. Maimonides' father apparently had quite a bit to write and quite a bit to be part of the connection of the Jewish community in Morocco, and the Moroccan community named this celebration after him because he was such an important player in the world of Moroccan Judaism 1,000 years ago. Maybe that's where the name comes from. But no matter where the name comes from, Memuna is a great holiday because Memuna is the celebration of the end of Pesach, and it has themes of joy and success and money, financial success, relationship success, and freedom and peace. Those are the themes of Memuna. And there are certain decorations that you're supposed to have on your table and certain foods that are eaten during Memuna. There's always live fish. Why live fish? Some say it's to commemorate the parting of the sea because there would have been fish on either side of the sea, right? Some say live fish because, well, dead fish represents not hope, and live fish represents hope. You're also supposed to have gold and money on the table to celebrate this idea of financial success. Why financial success? Because when you come out of slavery, you should then succeed and be a successful person. All of these are themes of Memuna. But perhaps the most important theme of Memuna is the theme of brotherhood and sisterhood, of fellowship. And why is this an important concept? Well, I want to start with a story. About, if I look back on the calendar, let me see, about 2.5 weeks ago, when Lisa and I were still on our vacation, we took a couple of days out of our trip to Israel to go over and hang out in Jordan. We went to Petra, and then after Petra, we went to Wadi Rum. How many of you have heard of Wadi Rum? The same person that heard of Mamuna. So Wadi Rum, how many of you have seen pictures of Wadi Rum? You all have. How many of you have seen the movie The Martian? Anybody seen The Martian? Anybody seen the movie Dune? The new movie Dune. Anybody see it? How about the old movie from decades ago, Lawrence of Arabia? Anybody? All of those movies were filmed in Wadi Rum, which is in the middle of the Jordanian desert. And if you visit there and you see pictures of it, you see why, because it looks like you're on another planet when you're there because of the mountain and rock formations. It doesn't look like anything you've seen on this earth anywhere. And the sand all over, multiple colors, deep yellows and reds and blacks, and just sand colors that you don't see in many places. It looks like another world. We had a private tour with a Bedouin through Wadi Rum. He drove us around in his Jeep. We drove to different places and saw different rock formations and different sand dunes. We climbed great tall sand dunes. And in the middle of the day, he took us into this canyon in the middle of nowhere. And there was no one there except for us. The closest people to us were miles and miles and miles away. And he took out of the Jeep the ancient Bedouin tool, the ice chest. And he put it on the ground, and then he put a mat on the ground. And he said to us, see that little pathway into the canyon right there? He said, go hike. It'll take you about 10 minutes to get to the end and 10 minutes to come back. And by the time you get back, I should have the fire started. And so we did. We walked this beautiful little canyon, and we looked at some of the flowers that were growing in between these desert rock formations. And we came back, and the fire was started. And then we sat and watched him as he took out the chicken that had been marinating and chopped up some arugula and some tomatoes and some cucumbers. And he crushed some chickpeas, and he made fresh hummus for us and a fresh salad and barbecue chicken and this wonderful roasted eggplant dish, all in the middle of a deserted canyon in the middle of Wadi Rum, miles and miles from any other person on planet Earth. And then he sat there and watched as we ate it in front of him. Why? Because it's the middle of Ramadan, and he was fasting, as Muslims do on Ramadan. I said to him, I feel very badly. We're eating all of this food that you prepared the food, we're eating it in front of you, and we're having this whole conversation about life and the universe with you, and you can't eat anything for another, probably 7 or 8 more hours. And I just feel badly eating. And he said, no, don't. He said, I get great joy from knowing that this chicken, which I slaughtered this morning on my farm, and the cucumbers and the tomatoes and the arugula, everything that you're eating came from my farm, and I picked all of it this morning. And I see the enjoyment on your face. And I don't need to eat in order to get pleasure. I get the pleasure from watching you eat all of these things that I grew. And we got into a discussion of what was coming up that had happened now, of Passover and Easter and Ramadan all converging together, which doesn't happen very often. It's every few decades it does. We got into a whole discussion of that. And to me, I thought it was so wonderful that here we are, this Bedouin Muslim and this American rabbi and his wife and a Jeep made in Japan, it wasn't a Jeep brand, it was another Japanese brand, and we're sitting here in the middle of Jordan on a grill that I'm pretty sure was made in Germany with a chicken that who knows where its ancestors came from, but kind of a worldly collection of things, right? a worldly collection of stuff. And here we were, just enjoying the peace of the earth around us. Well, that's what happens on Memuna. On Memuna, one of the important things that you have to eat on Memuna is mufleta. And what is mufleta? It's sort of thicker than a crepe and skinnier than a pita. How's that? It's a piece of bread. But you can't make the bread. If you're Jewish, why can't you make the bread? Because you don't own any flour because you sold it for Pesach. But if the Muslims in your community bring you the flour, and then you cook together with the Muslims and enjoy the holiday of Memuna and dip the mufleta, this kind of thick pancake thing, into honey that the Jewish community supplied, and then take the flour that the Muslim community supplied and make it into a dough that you can then cook and then dip into the honey, it brings two cultures together. And for hundreds upon hundreds of years, this has been the tradition in Morocco. You may not know that the king of Morocco, his childhood best friend, was a nice little Jewish boy in his elementary school. And today, the king of Morocco, one of his main 3 advisors, is that same Jewish kid that was his best friend when he was in elementary school. The Jewish community of Morocco and the Muslim community of Morocco probably have the best relationship over the centuries of any Jewish and Muslim community together in any country in the world. And for hundreds of years, the Muslims of Morocco have brought flour to the Jews at the end of Pesach. And they came together and make the dough and cook the mufleta and dip it in the honey and eat all of the other wonderful fruits and things that go along with the celebration of Memuna. So while celebration of Memuna is a celebration of freedom and a celebration of success and even financial success, it's also a celebration of fellowship, of people coming together. We have so much in our news today, and it doesn't matter whether you watch American news or European news or Asian news, it doesn't matter. None of them are going to cover Memuna. Why? Wars sell advertising. People screaming about how much they hate other people sells advertising. Jews and Muslims eating bread dipped in honey doesn't sell advertising. But maybe it should. Maybe that should be the thing that we put on the news. Not that this group attacked that group, not that that group disagrees with this group. Maybe we should put on the news that on Saturday night in Israel and on Saturday night in Morocco, Muslims brought flour to Jews, and then they stayed. While together they mixed a dough, and they fried the dough, and they ate the dough together. I know it's kind of a boring news story, but it's a much more beautiful news story than anything I've seen on my television in a long, long time. So, celebrate Memuna. Even if you don't have people that are different than you. I'm going to a little Memuna celebration tomorrow night where there's going to be Jews and non-Jews there. It's a good thing. At the end of Pesach, have a little Memuna with some non-Jews. You're not going to go to a Memuna party? I've got a good suggestion for you. You ready for this? If you go in the morning to Amy's Donuts, I promise you there's some non-Jewish Colorado Springs police officers there. Buy them a donut. And then you'll have a little leaven something with someone from the non-Jewish community, and you'll both smile because you're eating something sweet at the end of Pesach. And if I were the news director of one of the local news stations, I'd put that on the news too. So there you go. We're going to come to the closing prayers of our service as we turn in our Siddur to Aleinu, which you will find on page 586. And we'll all rise at the bottom of the page. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, כך כתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. The bottom of 590. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו echad. We can be seated. Tomorrow morning, we traditionally say the words of Yizkor to bring Pesach to an end. We're going to say a shortened version of Yizkor this evening. You should all have these memorial booklets with you. If you just turn to the first inside page, to a poem called We Remember Them, and I'll ask that you read responsively with me. At the rising of the sun and at its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of the summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year, when it ends, remember. We read together, as long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joys we crave to share, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them together. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. We take a few moments of silent meditation to think of those who we have lost in this past year and in years gone by. On the next 6 or so pages, there are prayers in remembrance of a parent, of a spouse, of a child, of a sibling, or of other relatives. We take a moment to find those prayers that speak to us in time of silent meditation. Just a few pages beyond those prayers, we find the 23rd Psalm. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai rohi lo echsar, beno deshe yibitzeni, al mei menuchot, Yinaleni, nafshi yishoveh, v'yancheni b'magle tzedek, leman shemo. Gam ki lech b'geit al mavet, lo yirara, ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha, hema yinachamuni. Taroch lefanai, shulchan neged zorarai. Dashanti b'shemen rosi, kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni, kol yemei chayai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai, v'leorech yamin. We read together a psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures. God leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul. God guides me in straight paths for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. On this day of Yizkor, this day of remembrance, as you can see, all of the lights on our Yizkor memorial board are lit, as we traditionally do for each time of Yizkor. We've added a few plaques to the wall as well. We will be having another formal dedication of all of the plaques on the Shabbat right before the high holidays in September. But if anybody has a plaque that they've added, that they're here tonight, has anybody added a new one since? I know we have a couple of people that are with us online as well. But we'll have a formal dedication of all of the new plaques. We haven't been able to do that for a couple of years because of COVID, but we'll be doing that officially as we make our way there. In our yard sites this evening, we remember those who have died of the COVID-19 virus. We also remember in our yard sites the anniversary of the deaths of Daniel Drucker, Fred Harris, Herbert Zolat, Louis Gans, Lucille Rinsky, Rosalie Feinberg, Cheryl Pitchler, Cynthia Thogud, Jack Gerfine, Max Schatz, Philip Reich, Benjamin Bonney, Michael Baker, Morris Freeman, Herbert Spitalnik, Morris Zolat, Richard Gillick, Sarah Sandler, Charlotte Millman, Francis Segaloff, Frida Rosenberg, Gloria Wolfson, Joseph Epstein, Marlene Ishbitz, Eva Rosenfeld, J.E. Cook, Cynthia Thogud, Donald Stroop, Elaine Eager, Jan Perry, Robert Bloom, Joe Siegel, Sidney Gillick, Rabbi John Sherwood. And we also mark the closing of Shloshim for Ira Sheck. Are there any other yard sites that anyone is observing? Yihiu zichronam levracha, may their memories be an eternal blessing. We ask mourners to rise and those whose custom it is to stand as well, as we turn in our Siddur to page 598, as in their memory we sanctify God's name. Yihiu zichronam levracha, may their memories be a blessing. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, Be'alma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute, B'chaye echon u'vyom echon u'v'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala u'vizman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach la'olam u'la'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudisha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, t'amira be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shamaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. A few announcements before we, you can be seated. A few announcements before we bring our service to a close. We want to remind everybody that tomorrow morning there's services beginning at 9:30, including Hallel and Yizkor and 2 Torahs, so lots going on tomorrow morning. Sunday morning is the rescheduled men's club program from last week, featuring featuring our guest speaker who's going to talk about nuclear proliferation in the Middle East and the relationship of Israel and Iran and such. He's a professor at the United States Air Force Academy and was not able to be with us last Sunday, but it's coming up this Sunday, 2 days from now. Should be a wonderful program. It's going to be on Zoom, right? Yeah, on Zoom. So please, if you signed up last time, come again. You got to have a wonderful guest speaker last week, I should say, which was me. I didn't know I was going to be the guest speaker, but I became the guest speaker. So, but please do come. It's going to be he's supposed to be a fabulous speaker, a really, really informative program. So even if you didn't sign up for last week, you can come this week on Zoom. Minyan at 9, program beginning at 9:30. Is that right, Alan? Did I get those times right? No davening, just 9:30. So 9:30 on Zoom. You can check the temple website, sign up, and we can get that information to you for that. Also, please make sure that on May 1st, Sunday, May 1st, you join us here in the sanctuary at 11 o'clock for our armed